Well, hello, everyone. It's the second episode of Conspiracy Truth Finders with Bob Kiviat. And today we're going to get into something that it's a very special subject for me. And I think it's basically UFOs and the government. And I've been really trying to be on this track for pretty much most of my career. And the TV shows that I've made, I'm always trying to bring in government people who would understand what UFOs might be and try to tell the public what they are. Well, we have some news the last couple of days. I believe it was Sunday, Donald Trump was asked about UFOs. And the reason apparently that he was asked about UFOs was that somebody basically had come out with a documentary. A guy named James Fox, who I know pretty well over the years, a very good documentary maker about UFOs. And basically that documentary is out. It's really a kind of an encyclopedic kind of a case about the UFO enigma. And he's really done a lot of great work in this area, James. And we may have him on in a future show. But anyway, apparently he was on Tucker Carlson talking about his documentary called The Phenomenon. And this movie probably inspired Donald, the president, to think a little about UFOs because he apparently watches Tucker Carlson. That's my theory, that he was watching Tucker Carlson. A lot of people believe that. And so when asked, are there UFOs, Mr. President? He said, oh, I heard something about that recently, whatever. And here's the line. And he said as a reply, but, we have a lot of great weapons, essentially. And, boy, you got to see the weapons we've got. The Chinese, the Russians, they be sort of jealous of our weapons and are always, jealous of our stuff. And that was kind of an interesting way to get into the idea of UFOs because many people have gone public now saying, was that Donald trying to, say he'd use these great weapons that we've got to fight aliens if they ever get a little bit out of line? So that was a pretty crazy thing, actually. But that's, I think we're living in a time right now that nothing should surprise us. But basically that, was the timing that I was looking at for the last couple of days, that Donald Trump finally was talking about UFOs a little bit more than he had been. And the amount of effort people have had to try to figure out if Donald knows anything about UFOs, I think people need to kind of take a minute on this and take a breath, because I don't think a lot of presidents have been told that much about UFOs. They fall into a very kind of, national security issue, even if we're only talking about sophisticated weapons that might be made by, our enemies, the Chinese, the Russians, it's always going to be considered to be national security. But The whole thing about the media and the government came into full circle. And this is pretty much, I think, why Donald's still talking about, the president's talking about UFOs. I think it all goes back to 2017 when the New York Times released a series of videos that appeared to be maybe UFOs. And the New York Times coverage was very, very weak. I felt the coverage did not have the kind of expertise that it should have. So when I looked at the videos they were showing right away, it looked to me like there were problems in this. And that's when I came across, I believe, one of the most skillful, had many, many skill sets, a researcher, a filmmaker, and really somebody that has added so much to the story of the Pentagon UFOs, this 2017 release that the New York Times made. And this gentleman is named Dave Beatty, and he has done a fabulous job. I've worked with Dave a little bit on this story, and I want to introduce Dave right now. Dave, down in Florida, how are you? Good to see you.
Hey, Bob, I'm doing great. It's still hot here. And don't forget one other skill set. That's Grandpa. My 3-year-old granddaughter is running circles around me, but I'm doing well. I hope you're doing well and you're healthy.
Well, I am, and I'm trying to keep up with the story, as you know. So when I first got involved, I looked at the 2 videos the New York Times had released. Their story, as you remember, Dave, the story that everybody was hearing was that sometime apparently in 2004. They were giving the information of 2004, and New York Times showed 2 videos on their website. And right away, they said this happened in 2004 off the coast of California, pretty much. And that's about it. And right away, I looked at the videos, and I think you did also. Separately, we hadn't yet met each other. And you probably saw the videos and went, they don't look right. They can't be from the same event, because one video looked like it was an older, low resolution image of something just kind of like sitting on camera and then kind of moving in a herky-jerky way off camera to the left. And the other video appeared to be a sharper quality in some ways. You could see more numbers and readings on the dials or whatever the information was on the outside of the video image. And so it looked like a much more recent video. Wasn't it your first feeling as well, Dave?
Yes, absolutely. I think that there wasn't, if I recall, there wasn't a lot of detail given about the actual videos themselves. There was like a subsection about the 2004 event and the pilots that witnessed that, I think in another part of the paper. But yeah, you're right. And looking at that, that initial release of videos, we were left to wonder, well, what is this? Is this both from 2004? These are obviously different incidents. So at that point, we thought, the FLIR one, the name that they gave the video at that time, was 2004, but we didn't have any idea where the other one came from. And the other thing was there was no sound on the 2004 object is sitting there, but the other one had this like very excited voice on it that was exclaiming about what they were seeing on their FLIR. Exactly.
So what happened was, as you remember, I'm just telling everyone the story. I eventually got in contact with you. I said, what do you know about it? You set up a website where you were looking for more witnesses to the Nimitz. Tell us about the website that you created about this event and what you were trying to achieve initially, and then we'll get into it from there.
Yeah, I mean, initially, I formed a group that was sort of a general group looking at this material, specific to the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program mentioned in the Times article. And I opened it up to the UFO community specifically because I had, in the past done some research, but for a decade or so, I was kind of out of it. But very quickly, I gathered a core group of people, and I decided that I was going to focus on this Southern California, San Diego, off the coast, strange event with the Navy. Right. So, I mean, while we were talking about it in my head, I started thinking, look, I should do some graphics and put together a project, and maybe we can attract some of the witnesses. Maybe we can get some more information on our own. Because I'm a firm believer that anybody, if you do the work, if you put in the effort, you can break information, even if you're not a national media journalist. If you're a citizen journalist, you can also go out there and find new material. So I started a website called thenimitzEncounters.com, and I started a YouTube channel called the same thing, thenimitzEncounters.com. Or the Nimitz Encounters on YouTube.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful lead into what happened next, because as you remember, Dave, I was interested in creating a documentary series. I have been talking to one of the networks, I'll say which it was Discovery Science, and we were trying to see how we would execute a very objective, and I mean objective, documentary. And Dave, when I saw what you were creating by using very, very interesting visual effects and how you were doing it, I was blown away. And so you were so nice to me. You brought a lot of the video, which, by the way, Dave has a movie. We're going to make sure everybody knows where to watch it. Dave, just before I get into the rest of it, just tell us exactly what your movie is and where we can find it, so we never have to go back to this part, but tell us where we can find the movie itself.
Sure. The movie is called The Nimitz Encounters, and that was some of the first material you saw with a lot of computer graphic imagery that I created to sort of recreate this event off of, San Diego. And so that was the first piece of video that you became familiar with. And then later on that year, later in 2017 and 2018, I created this movie called The Nimitz Encounters, and now it's on Amazon Prime. If you want to see it on your big screen, that's a great way to see it. You can see it on YouTube as well, and you can find it on my website, thenimitzEncounters.com.
And then, so that's how it is now. You have a great finished and even evolving movie. But when we were getting together back early on, I asked you, and you were so gracious to allow me to use some of the footage you created and really just weave in the documentary concept. And so we created what we call in the business a sizzle reel. And this reel really kind of sets the story up. So if you don't mind, Dave, I'm going to let our viewers see our little sizzle reel that we kind of created, at least maybe a quick 5 minutes of it. It's all your work, Dave. So everyone should notice now. I'm showing not only it's Dave's dexterity as an editor, it's his knowledge as a researcher. And let me say this, in terms of creating a courtroom kind of reconstruction that the military could look at and say, oh, the pilot didn't have any video of that part of the event, but here's what it looked like. I'll tell you right now, these are almost like courtroom reconstructions. So when you see this, as we play it, you'll see what I believe to be photographic-like quality of what the pilot, especially this pilot named David Fravor, we'll talk about today, what he witnessed. And we have a lot of backup information about that. So without further ado, let's play the ultimate disclosure sizzle. That is still a potential series that I'm looking at doing, and Dave would be part of that, of course.
Looking out over the ocean toward the horizon, sun, sea, and sky form an endless vista, a never-ending cycle of tide, wind, and waves. Here, far from shore, strange events have unfolded. These stories stretch the boundaries of our imagination and challenge our beliefs. This is a true story of such events from the accounts of the sailors and naval aviators who experienced them. Professional military service members who want the world to know that what they encountered is real. Even more troubling, our military has no explanation. The answers seem to elude everyone, like reflections on the waves, yet they are out there. Sunday, November 14th, 2004, morning, 90 miles southeast of San Diego, California, in the Naval Operations Area, the Nimitz Carrier Strike Group and her complement of warships and the aircraft of Air Wing 11 are conducting a routine 2-week training exercise. The Nimitz deck crew is busy launching FA-18F Super Hornets, helicopters, and E-2 Hawkeye electronic warfare planes. The mission? Simulated air defense, or ADEX training over the Pacific. The winds are calm, the skies are clear, a near-perfect day for flying. Nearby, the Aegis missile carrier USS Princeton has been tracking unknown aircraft that appear and disappear from its sophisticated radar screen. Princeton's main role is air defense of the strike group. For the past few days, Senior Chief Kevin Day has noticed these peculiar craft appearing on his radar screen. In some cases, they seem to descend from space and then suddenly plunge to near sea level in seconds. Coupled with the unidentified nature of the craft and lack of clearance, these extreme flight observations are very troubling to the crew assigned to protect the carrier group from aerial threats. On this morning, Pilot Commander David Fravor of the VFA-41 Black Aces Fighter Squadron and his wingmen prepared a launch from Nimitz for the air defense training exercises. As they launch their FA-18s, they have no knowledge of the events happening nearby. Back in the Combat Information Center on Princeton, the mysterious objects are back. And today is the first time Senior Chief Day has jets in the air that can intercept the mysterious aircraft. Day briefs the captain, and they agree to send the Hornets. Princeton's Air Intercept Controller contacts the flights.
110, we have a real-world tasking for you. Unknown aerial contact, Broad 270, 41 at Angels 20.
As Fast Eagle approaches the target, they see nothing unusual. Onboard radars show a blank screen.
Hey, you guys seeing this? 3 o'clock in the water. Yeah! What is that?
Suddenly, Dave sees it.
So it would be on the right-hand side of the airplane, just forward of the wing line, is this little white, which looks like a Tic Tac, which is why we call it the Tic Tac, and it's moving around erratically, so it's doing this.
2 miles. Holy 4,000! It jumped! Wow!
It's about the size of an F-18, so, 40-some feet long. It has no wings. And it takes off like nothing I've ever seen. It literally is 1 minute it's there, and the next minute it's like poof, and it's gone.
The video you are now watching is the actual gun camera FLIR footage of the Tic Tac taken by a later flight. This is the first video ever released by the U.S. government showing military planes engaging UFOs.
This had no control surfaces. It had no known visible propulsion mode. On the IR, it had no heat. It was a uniform color throughout. When you get to the end of the video, you can kind of see it on the YouTube video. When we had the original stuff, you could see it quite well. He's getting relatively close to it. You can see there's 2 small objects that look like, think of a little like a letter, like little feet sticking out the bottom, like a little landing gear or antenna or something coming out of the bottom. So it came down and then just went both in the same direction.
Well, there you go. A little taste of what the documentary would get into. But most importantly, that was only the part so far about the Nimitz and what the 2004 event the New York Times talked about and wrote about. And Dave did a fabulous job showing, as you can see, even superimposing the UFO that was in the actual footage from 2004. And basically, Dave showed you what the pilot witnessed, and more than one witness, by the way, which we'll talk about today, what he witnessed, and then one of his comrades, if you will, pilot, shot that video after at a different time. But Dave showed you what the pilots reported, or this pilot, David Fravor, another Dave, he saw these little kind of, Dave Beatty, tell me, what if they look like little antennas at the bottom? Tell me what you think is going on there before we get into the rest of our wild story.
Well, yeah, he did describe seeing on the FLIR footage these little protrusions on the bottom of it that were like little L-shaped antenna or landing gear or something. I have learned since that he did not see them from the cockpit, like while he was flying around. He only saw them later. So, I do have them in my film because I thought he saw them, from the cockpit, but right. Apparently they were there at one point or another. Yeah. And I think at this point, because when you showed us what Dave Fravor more or less said he saw, it just began to go percolate in my mind. That's like Earthlings would create. We would create a blimpy looking craft with antennas on it maybe, and be able to remote control this thing. Not to say that aliens couldn't do that, but the old expression of, Occam's razor, sometimes the simplest explanation is the right one. So right away, let's continue this discussion now with the second video. So the second video that was released by the New York Times initially, and then later on was the government came on and said, yes, that was our video, but there was a lot of weirdness, which we'll get into later. I mean,
the gimbal video. They called it the gimbal video. Now, when I saw the video, Dave, to me, I didn't know what to make of it. It was moving in an interesting way. Why don't we play the video? This is now the second video the New York Times released called the gimbal video. They never gave it a year. They didn't say it was different than 2004. We, of course, Dave and I, separately, I guess, felt it was not, the same event, didn't look anything close to the same event, same camera, same technology. None of that matched. And then the audio on this more recent looking event is very telling to some people. Let's play the gimbal video. We're going to play it twice so you can hear what the pilot says about this extraordinary event at the beginning of it, the clip. Here we go.
Dude, this is a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing, dude. That's not our LNS though, is it? It's not. That is an LNS, dude. Well, if there's like... Look at that thing. It's rotating.
Okay, now we're going to what we say.
Dude, this is a fucking drone, bro. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA.
So you hear the pilot, Dave, and everyone watching today. I mean, the pilot says it's a bleeping drone. And he sounds a little bit deflated. I'm not quite sure how you conflate the rest of the video audio to the beginning. But Dave, the old expression, if someone tells you something, maybe you should believe them. So whether or not these videos show aliens or our own technology or another country's technology, the pilot does identify it in his own mind as a drone and a fleet of drones. So, Dave, why don't you tell us how you were able to figure out, through the help of some of your intrepid researchers, that this video came from a specific part of the country on a specific time period, and even identified, and it turned out to be 100% accurate, a different aircraft carrier on the other side of the country 11 years later.
Yeah. Listening to the audio of the gimbal video, I think many of us, when we first heard it, thought that the pilot was like sort of asking a question, but he does, as you said, makes a statement. That's a effing drone, bro. Versus, is that a drone? So that is sort of a mystery what he meant by that statement.
Definitely.
We got some tips by some of the journalists that, you might call embedded journalists that have this information given to them, or I don't know how they get it because no other journalists have it, that this gimbal was taken off the East Coast of the United States. So we found out first, just that broad thing, that wasn't the West Coast, that was the East Coast. The second thing that we got was a year. And I believe that came out, sort of on Twitter or something like that,
right, has a year.
Yeah, so it was like given that this was 2015 off the East Coast. So it's a pretty broad brushstroke, but it's not very difficult to figure out that there's only a specific number of carrier strike groups that are going to be off the East Coast of the United States conducting air operations that you're seeing in the video. So we started looking at that. We quickly found that there was one carrier strike group in that year that was training for, deployment to the Middle East. And that was the USS Theodore Roosevelt carrier strike group. So once we found that, we started thinking, okay, how can we know about when that carrier strike group was off the East Coast? And we started looking at things like wind speed. And why would we look at that? Well, the pilot gives you a clue in that video you just saw. He said, look at that thing, it's going against the wind. And the other guy says, I think it's something like the wind's like 220 out of the east or 120 out of the east. We know the altitude because it shows it on the display. So we have a wind speed that's pretty fast at 20,000 feet. So we started looking at weather balloon soundings and wind speed data across, that time frame of winter of 2015. And we found out there was very few times when you had that type of wind speed at that altitude. And we narrowed it down to January. We started looking at the cloud patterns.
Amazing.
Yeah, so we kind of figured out that the clouds you see in that would only be part of a frontal boundary system. We know that's when the wind speeds are going to be coming up. And we got closer and closer to that week of January 20th. We never knew for sure that that's when that was filmed until like years later, when finally the New York Times released the date. But up until that point, we were simply doing it. There's a researcher named Christoph Spitzer and a few other guys that were helping with this, but it wasn't just me. I mean, those guys, Keith Basterfield out of Australia, they were the ones that really found those dates.
A global effort of different people in different parts of the world. I got to tell you, I've looked at, and most people know this, I've done more of these investigations into caught on tape video of UFOs and government and not government. And I have to tell you, this is one of the most amazing research projects. And I know Dave's very, he's modest about this, but he first of all, he brought in the public. He asked people to contact him. Those people became part of the investigation. They helped him figure it out. You got to love that. And that's the kind of thing in the UFO field we really have to have. Now, there's one more video they released, the third video, which we now, of course, know now came from the Roosevelt 2, right, Dave? But we really don't know if it was the same exact time period. Before we see the video, Dave, what do you know about the Go Fast video, which we're going to show right now, which is the plane is apparently looking down at the ocean and they're seeing this fast-moving Go Fast UFO. What do you know about the actual Go Fast video before we show it, just in general, Dave? What do you know?
Yeah, so again, we didn't know much about that. That was not released in December. It was released a few months later by To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, a private sort of research group, entertainment
we'll get
group.
To them later, Dave. Don't worry.
But yeah, I mean, they were the ones that released it on their website. And we knew that it definitely sounded like the same people, and like the pilots. And we found out later when the DOD sort of admitted that these were real videos, that the two videos were filmed on the same day, and pretty sure that they were filmed by the same air crew.
Interesting. So in other words, this would be the same exact missions or sorties they were doing, and this is just one more video. Now, everyone, when you watch this, I think we should play it twice again. So we're going to play it twice. Check out the video, but also check out the audio.
Shooting did you box moving target? No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at it fly.
One more time.
Roger, there's shooting did you box moving target? No, I took an auto track. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, dude. Wow, look at it fly.
Now, Dave, I don't know about you, but I noticed right away when you look at this video, there's clearly a technological experiment going on. It appears to me, and many people I've spoken to, just an opinion, that they're sort of racking up or getting their equipment ready to capture this thing or something like it in that little viewfinder, what do you want to call it there? And he's boxing it, meaning that he's capturing it so the system, I believe, can lock on it like a radar lock or a missile lock or anything like that. And then he was very proud of himself for being able to lock it. How did you see it, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that strikes you is they're having fun. They're laughing. I guess fighter pilots are sort of that type of personality that even facing something that might be a threat or you don't know what it is, like if you saw an unknown object that's in your airspace, you don't know what it is, you might be a little more serious about it, but maybe, they just thought it was an unusual thing and didn't see it as a threat. You're right. The ATFLIR pod has the ability to optically track. It's not a radar. It can use a radar, but in this case, it's, he says he got an auto track on it. So the FLIR itself is tracking this object. The jet is moving pretty fast, hundreds of miles an hour. So this object between, the jet and the sea below, you see a lot of movement. But, that doesn't necessarily mean that this object is going fast. In fact, some researchers have kind of postulated it's not really that fast. It's a small object that's going maybe, like around 100 miles an hour or something. So slower than a jet possibly, but, farther away. And the parallax movement makes it seem like it's like really cruising.
Sure. And the interesting thing to me on top of that, Dave, is that the pilots do not seem to be reacting like they just encountered a UFO from deep space and it was going to make news. And oh my God, almost like you'd imagine they would have been in a very tight-lipped military mode. And they have just now, let's just say hypothetically, that they were up there looking for any unknowns like this because they have been coming. The stories are we're hearing from the governmental side of things that there was more than one event occurring. So they were aware of these things, these tic-tacs or whatever you want to call them that you beautifully showed us graphically. So when we look at that issue, we have to say to ourselves, they were up there, they knew something was going on, they were trying to capture something, but that reaction does not appear to be, to me anyway, that they were encountering unknown beings from another planet, and they were even considering that. But that's another issue. So we didn't learn much more about this video, I know, from the research, Dave. How do you think the videos, all three, just give me your impression before we talk about how they got out of the government's coffers back in 2017 and to the Stars Academy you mentioned and all of that. Tell me what you think the three videos, if you put them all together, what do you think they amount to at this point? Just the three videos.
Well, I mean, I think that if you look at them, the gimbal video, you see this rotating motion. That's maybe the most anomalous thing in all three of them that could potentially be hard to explain. I know some people like Mick West on the internet have suggested that that's an optical effect of the FLIR pod, optics rotating inside the device itself, causing a glare to like rotate and not the physical object rotating. So, I mean, before you jump to, extraterrestrial spacecraft from off Earth, non-human intelligence, you have to first, propose some earthly suggestions about what these are and why these pilots are seeing them. It's quite possible that the pilots did not know what they were, but why can't we say that maybe the pilots weren't in the loop, so to speak, but somebody else was in the loop and they were flying these craft, and maybe they didn't break the laws of physics. Maybe they were terrestrial in some scientific way, an advancement maybe. I'm not sure who owns them, if that's possible. But remember, I mean, these videos themselves, if you look at the tracking and the position of the objects and everything in the videos, it's not that anomalous that could not be explained by some type of aircraft or drone or something like that.
It's a great way to explain it, actually. And the more I hear you say it, the more I want to just get to the more current assumptions being made. And then I'm going to explain to you the research that, we were doing, but also a little bit of stuff I haven't even told you yet. So the three videos themselves appear to have convinced Marco Rubio, politician, to say very recently that we need to find out what these objects are. If they're Russian and they're Chinese technology and they're ahead of us, and we need to know basically. And he even made a reference that, you know what? It's almost better if they were alien, because it'll be a little easier to deal with maybe politically if the Chinese and the Russians have this kind of technology. So I'm not quite sure if that necessarily is a true thing that Rubio is saying, but let's talk more about the government. So when these people went to the New York Times and they said to the New York Times, hey, we've got these videos. The first person that impressed the New York Times was a guy named Lou Elizondo. Lou Elizondo said that he was working in a very secret program with the help of, he even mentioned, I think very early on, that this was money that was generated through the help of Harry Reid, who used to be the Senate Majority Leader under the Democrats. And he was very prolific in trying to get the word out that he believed UFOs are real. He's been talking this way for a very long time. Harry Reid, no longer in the government, but he has been speaking even recently, and we'll get to him in a minute, about how much he thinks these are real UFOs from another planet. Maybe not this video or these videos, but that the United States government knows UFOs are real. They come from another place. They're not from here. They're from an off-world location. A lot of the UFO reports around the world, they've affected our nuclear bases. They've affected the nuclear missile codes. They've affected the Russian nuclear missile codes. All true in the research I've done with UFOs in general. And the new documentary that came out that I mentioned earlier, that seems to be suggesting once again that that's the truth. Unfortunately, Dave, as you said, these videos don't show anything that would be considered to be otherworldly movement, or like the NASA scientists that I deal with all the years that I've done TV shows. NASA scientists always say, if the object is moving in a way that no one can explain, if it's doing things that go beyond the level of human capability, then it may be a real UFO from another planet. And it's amazing here, because here we have government video, Dave, government video of UFOs. The pilots report amazing aerodynamic maneuvers and everything else. You recreated those videos, or you recreated the movement that the pilots mentioned, but we don't see any of that in the videos. What do you make of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the videos themselves, I think that you can look at, and the people that are very good at video analysis and know these systems and how that they track and so on, have said that there really isn't anything in the videos themselves other than that little rotating thing that is, truly unexplainable. So then when you have the statements of the pilots, you have to put those together and say, well, what you're describing seems very unusual. Your memory hopefully is, tack sharp after all these years from 2004. And you really remember that exactly what you saw, that it could not be explained by any type of aircraft. I mean, that's kind of what the story is being presented. But again, human memory is sort of malleable, especially over time. I don't know what to make of it.
You said something really important. There's one moment in one of the videos where this object seems to turn in a way and rotate in a way that caught the attention of the pilot. And therefore, you mentioned a gentleman who does metabunk, Nick McWest. He debunks a lot of UFO and other type of things he calls pseudoscience. And he spent a lot of time trying to convince me, which he did convince me a lot, that you could create this effect. If you wanted to go out and film a video of a plane in the distance, you could create a very similar looking image if you wanted to kind of recreate this. So even the turning of the object isn't exactly proof of anything, according to a guy like Mick West, who's a really great guy and a good analysis guy, to do this kind of stuff. But here's where it gets interesting, Dave, as you know. So Lou Elizondo is the guy that allegedly came out of the military, the Pentagon. The idea was that he left the Pentagon because he didn't like the fact they weren't taking this seriously. And he was literally going to, tell the world finally that there are UFOs secretly being studied by the government. And he does not believe they're from this world. He made that point. He did not believe they're from this world. Well, you start digging into the research and you find out they formed a company called TTSA, To the Stars Academy, fronted by a former rock musician by the name of Tom DeLonge. Rock musician, wants to be a researcher of UFOs. Dubious endeavor, by the way, as we know, as you and I, Dave, know. So he apparently packs, Lou Elizondo packs with this other gentleman. And, it appears that DeLonge and Elizondo are going to take this to the public. But the New York Times also talked about a scientist, and he's behind most of it. His name is Hal Puthoff. He's a very well-known scientist who's got involved in what is called by many people pseudoscience. Things that aren't exactly science. They're theories. How about remote viewing, psychic power, the ability to see in the distance, or better yet, tap into somebody walking around. Let's say somebody's in Moscow right now, and they're walking around, they're looking at things in a government lab in Moscow. Well, there are people who believe psychics can tap into that person's awareness, pick up their imagery or pick up their vibration, and write down what they see and use it as like evidence. It's called remote viewing. That's the real form of remote viewing that was tested. Some people say, remote viewing is just somebody looking off into the distance of yonder, wherever, and writing down what they see, drawing a picture. Well, I beg to differ. The remote viewing that I knew about years ago that Hal Puthoff was involved in, they would have a target. So they would have a person out there somewhere in the world, and the psychic was tapping into that person. It gets very complicated. So when I heard Hal Puthoff was involved in this, and the New York Times said Hal Puthoff was the guy, the scientific arm of To the Stars Academy, I went, oh boy, this is sounding very familiar. It appears that Hal Puthoff gets himself entwined in these projects where there's money, they're raising money. To the Stars Academy had a website, timed to be launched pretty much when the article in the New York Times was coming out. And sure enough, they were taking money in from the public. And they were saying, if you donate X amount of dollars to us, you'll get stock in this company. And this company could well be the company that proves UFOs are real, anti-gravity propulsion's real. And you know how we know it? Because we're studying UFOs that we got from the government caught on tape. Huh? What? And that is the story the New York Times failed to look into. Dave, tell me what you know about that, because I'm going to continue that. But tell me what you know, because this is what I've learned myself.
I mean, you're sort of spelling it out. I don't know that much more than you. I mean, when the group first came out in October, I believe, of 2017 in a press conference, and these individuals stepped forward, a former deputy undersecretary of defense and so on. These people were Lockheed engineers. I was kind of blown away, like that this group of people were taking this seriously. And all through this, I mean, my point has been, either they're hoodwinking us or they completely believe this and they've seen some type of evidence behind the scenes that no one else has seen that has convinced them. I mean, I know that a lot of people, that's their position with this, that these guys know something that they're not telling us, that's why, they're kind of leading us along. But of course, you bring up a good possibility that maybe they don't know something and there's something more to it that's not being, revealed.
Well, you remember, Dave, you were very helpful in getting me a copy of this. Apparently, the gentleman you were talking about, who was a undersecretary of defense, what was the exact title of this gentleman again, Dave?
Yeah, he was Christopher Mellon was the basically a private equity investor, political commentator, and the chair of the science committee of the Carnegie Mellon, Museum of Natural History, former National Security Affairs Advisor, Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, and Minority Staff Director of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Yeah, so bottom line, he has an illustrious kind of title. The Mellon family is famous. He was in the government for a while doing a job. And I've learned in my own work, Dave, that does not mean he is an expert in this area. And it seems like it's a credential they were trying to weave into this release. He may be a very believing guy, but it's not exactly like a credential that would say he has the inside information, because he was not the one who got the images out as we were told initially. But then somebody apparently hacked his website. Dave, tell us what happened, the story about how Chris Mellon, the Politico type guy who was part of To the Stars Academy, not the scientist Hal Puthoff, we'll get back to him in a minute, but the idea that this Chris Mellon had his website hacked. Tell us what happened. Because I know you. Yeah, it was really strange, because obviously based on the title that I just gave you, you would think that somebody in the intelligence field, the IC community, I guess the IC, would have a pretty strong firewall for any kind of information that they didn't want to get out. But the story goes something like that there was a Twitter user, a random person from UK that I know who the guy is. I don't know his background, but he happened to stumble upon this website and clicked on some links on the website and suddenly found himself staring at a folder of documents that basically had a bunch of information about this Pentagon program. It had a sort of an interview with one of the pilots from the 2004 event. It had some photographs. It had some PowerPoint slides. But one of the most troubling things that was in this trove of documents was this report had all of the names of the witnesses,
exactly. You got it.
Unredacted. And we had seen this file before because it was on To the Stars website from the very beginning, this report. But all the names of the pilots, their addresses, their telephone numbers, and so on had been redacted, blacked out to protect their privacy. In this case, this document is out there in the public and being shared around. I mean, immediately all these files were flying all over the internet, and it had these pilots' names, their addresses, their cell phone numbers, sometimes their emails, everything. So it was really troubling that. And to this day, no one understands why that happened. The explanation at the time was that this was a folder that was just used for personal usage. And normally the WordPress site had a password protection on that particular page. If you went there, you had to hit a password to get past that stage to get to the URL. But they forgot to leave the password on, so it was just basically open to the public.
And a lot of people felt, and I felt, particularly I did, that it appeared to be a document folder, if you will, that he got. And in the folder were the 3 videos, uncut. I mean, at least, and they were much longer than the originals by the New York Times release, but you clearly got the feeling these were the videos that were given either to Lou Elizondo or to him, and they were released through this To the Stars Academy, New York Times kind of handoff. But what I'm trying to bring us to, Dave, is the very telling evidence that appears to show that there were people redacted in a column that appeared to be a group known as BASS. This is the Bigelow organization. Robert Bigelow, Las Vegas billionaire. He had a huge interest in UFOs. He had somehow put himself in the middle between UFO researchers, the government, by a few different things. He bought this property called Skinwalker Ranch. He claimed Defense Intelligence Agency people were coming there and seeing all kinds of things like UFOs and other type of phenomena. And overall, he also said that he was working with NASA. So Bob Bigelow, the fact that Bass was mentioned, Bass, as the company that was working with this ATIP or whatever the government called their program, smelled a little to me because it appeared that Lou Elizondo was under the category of Bass. That's what we noticed from that release, that Lou Elizondo, the guy who brought the videos to the New York Times, and the New York Times was so interested in his credentials, apparently wasn't exactly in the military operation looking at UFOs. It appears he was working with that scientist Hal Puthoff I mentioned, pseudoscience guy, government kind of like interloper, and, you know, the other people known as Bigelow, you know, research. Bigelow, whatever BASS stands for, basically it's an aerospace research organization interested in all kinds of different
Bigelow Aerospace Systems. Advanced Aerospace Systems, I think.
Yeah, right. So I was always wondering if you felt like I did, that maybe this was the beginning of showing that Bass was the real outlet for this video release. Bass had or Bigelow's group got this. They were going to make the most of it, and they then formed another division called TTSA. Now, I'm not saying Bigelow is part of TTSA, but this is the grouping, if you will. And according to my CIA contacts, which I've developed some over the last couple of years, they say the story smells rotten.
Yeah, I mean, what we learned very quickly after looking into what really happened with this Pentagon program, we very quickly found out that, you know, it wasn't necessarily a program that was set up inside, you know, the Pentagon. This was a private contractor, and Harry Reid's, you know, funding, this $22 million that's mentioned, basically was a contract that was set up by the DIA, and specifically went out to look for contractors that could study this type of material. In fact, if you look at these contracts, there's nothing that sounds even remotely close to like a UFO or an alien or even unknown objects or anything like that. The program itself, the contract was called the Advanced Aerospace Weapon System Application Program, called the AWSAP, you know, for an acronym. And Bigelow, his company, actually got this contract, and the first part of it was like a $10 million contract to study this stuff. And out there in Las Vegas, you know, at his headquarters, they set up a whole team of scientists and you know, facilities to help run this contract. And during that time frame, what is the deliverable for what do you get for $10 million? We do know that they released a series of scientific reports that they were called the Defense Intelligence Research Documents, the DIRDs. And if you look at this list of research documents that came from kind of outsourced to scientists at universities, for instance, around the world, including Dr. Hal Puthoff and Dr. Eric Davis as well, they don't all see, I mean, most of them don't have anything to do with, like, again, UFOs. They're, you know, studying other types of hypersonic flight, lasers, you name it, in the aerospace kind of world, kind of high-end, cutting-edge research, but not anything to do with UFOs or Tic Tacs.
Exactly. So I was really trying to get to the point where this group from the Chris Mellon file seems to be much more of a private organization that sort of got their hands and their mitts into the government, you know, auspices. And somehow, well, I'll tell you the bottom line. I spoke to both Susan Goff, who handles the communications for the DOD, about this entire affair, call it the 3 videos themselves, and another gentleman at the Navy named Grandisher. I spoke to both these people, and here's my conclusion. Sue Goff is pretty much saying that, well, Chuck's, I'm paraphrasing here, Mr. Elizondo got those videos. He shouldn't have gotten those videos. He had no authorization for those videos. And she was looking into what penalties there might be, at least last year she was. What penalties could there be for someone like this? She wasn't saying that he would be charged with anything, but she made it very clear to me there was indeed some question about the legality of his getting his hands on these videos. And then the Navy sort of kind of backtracked and was saying, well, we're looking into it, and that's what Grandisher told me, we're gonna let you know, Bob, and everyone will know in the future. But right now, we're not saying anything. And then eventually they came out with, a few months ago, what was it? We believe these are our videos, of course, the Navy says, and they show anomalous, unexplained objects. That's it. That's all they've told us, right, Dave? So that's all we know so far. But I want to say that my talks to the CIA got into some interesting things. At the same time they were talking to me about this, a former head of a division that literally ran what they call the weird desk or the UFO desk or whatever at the CIA, he came out like in documents like years ago, and these were leaked documents that came out, claiming that my famous alien autopsy film, the one that we believe at Fox Network and I believe, is a fake video, and we debunked it in a show called World's Greatest Hoaxes, Secrets Finally Revealed on Fox years ago. We believe it's a fake video created by this gentleman named Ray Santilli and his band of fakers. However, the CIA, according to some documents released fairly recently, claimed, no. One gentleman at the CIA, one scientist by the name of Kit Green, said, no, it could be real. And I was like, no, it can't be real. We know where it came from. We're very aware where it came from and who faked it. It took many years to find that out. When I first aired it, I didn't know that. Let's show everybody once again the video we're talking about called The Alien Autopsy, a little outtake from my show, which people still call it pretty famous. Take a look at this, everybody. Take a look.
The alleged cameraman claims he shot the footage at Fort Worth Army Air Base. In a letter, he explains to us that one of the aliens discovered near Roswell had been secretly flown there for further study. This could be the world's first look at an actual being from another planet.
You are watching the autopsy of what some say is an alien from outer space. Though silent, the 17-minute film is as dramatic as any science fiction thriller to come out of Hollywood. But this may not be a filmmaker's fantasy. This could very well be real. The strange body appears intact, except for an ugly wound on the right thigh. Two mysterious doctors wearing contamination suits study its bizarre features. A third person wearing a mask watches from behind the glass partition. Is this indeed a top-secret military autopsy performed on an alien in 1947? Like with any mystery, we need to hear from witnesses, examine the hard evidence, and bring in the experts. First, the eyewitnesses.
Daddy said they looked like a small 10-year-old child. The head was too large for the body, and the skin color was a pink with a kind of a gray cast to it. Of course, you can't tell skin color in this, but the size, the shape of the eyes, that would all pretty well fit.
The nurse that was supposedly there described an individual that may have looked somewhat like the individual that was being autopsied. The large head, the black eyes. I think she described 4 fingers rather than 6. So there's a discrepancy or difference there.
According to Frankie Rowe, her father discovered 3 beings still alive at the crash site.
He kept saying, there's no need for us to be afraid. They're not here to hurt us. And he said that he really felt badly that we couldn't help them.
The cameraman writes that he photographed 3 strange beings. Each was crying, clutching a box close to his chest. They cried louder as we approached, he writes. One of the officers managed to pry loose the box by hitting the being with the butt of his rifle.
I feel very sorry for whoever that was. If it was from some other world, planet, their family will never know what happened to them. They'll never go back home.
Of course, this could all be a story that the cameraman made up. An eyewitness testimony is sometimes unreliable, especially when it's almost 50 years old. What clues can we examine to determine whether what we're seeing is a true historical document or a clever fabrication? We've looked closely at some of the objects in the room. Our purpose? To determine whether they even existed in 1947. The wall clock, a General Electric model, is indeed from the 1940s. And that black phone with the heavy receiver and the curly cord is a Bell Standard model from 1937. Though they could all be purchased later, their presence in the room is nonetheless consistent with the time period. That brings us to the film itself. Can it be dated? We took the film to Larry Cate, who spent 16 years in the
I think we
manufacturing
cut that there, Courtney, because apparently we had her out. We had her out to kick it out, but it's okay. That just gives us an idea of what this was. And again, that's the CIA claiming in documents, but the documents were released by, guess who? The Bob Bigelow Group, the same people involved in Bass and everything we just talked about, the people that we were describing before behind this TTSA, some of the same people. That's the kind of thing we're looking at here, that these CIA types sometimes throw these curveballs. And so now the CIA guy is taking it back, saying the film is not real. But I'm getting to know the CIA pretty well. So I got to know that the CIA is developing drones, and they're developing something called self-aware drones. Well, right behind me on this television, we were having a meeting here at my office this morning. That's pretty much why I put this up on the screen. This is a UFO video from 2003. Remember that? 2003, the Nimitz is 2004, the Tic Tac Dave created. This object that looks like a flying saucer was literally shot by this individual you see in the upper corner there, Jeff Willis. He's an Arizona-based, very, very detailed videographer. He shot this video over his house. It flies in a way that can't be explained. It looks like a super duper incredible drone, and it flies away in such a manner that no one can really explain it. So I'm going to say there's a little almost like electronic antenna-y feeling at one moment in the video. We're going to play some of the video right now of this video known as the domed saucer flying on its side video, daylight saucer. Take a look at this thing. It's self-explanatory. This is what I believe could have been the early generation of some of the drones that Marco Rubio and other people are maybe talking about, and the Tic Tac might be. So take a look at this. On May 24th, 2003, an object in the sky was recorded by this amazing person over Phoenix. At the time, it was unusual. But over the years, it has come to be regarded as perhaps the most impressive unidentified flying object ever, and might be extraterrestrial in origin. Reason number 5. It's the clearest UFO ever documented in broad daylight, with no conventional explanation by a credible source.
Oh my God. Where'd it go?
The video is crystal clear and was shot by a respected videographer, Jeff Willis, while standing outside his home. He's been featured on the local news for filming other unknown craft in the area, and journalists have confirmed his videos are authentic. So if you notice right there where we stopped it, it was all happening what we call in camera. There's nothing to say. He comes up on the house, he sees the craft coming near his house, and then it repels in such a manner. It's the only thing I've seen, Dave. It's the only thing I've ever noticed on any video I've ever aired or any video I've ever gotten my hands on that acts in a way like the pilots of the New York Times story, the Nimitz case, the Roosevelt case, all that we talked about, the Pentagon UFOs. It's the only thing that I've ever seen that seems to repel in such a manner it would freak out almost any pilot who saw that. So what do you think of that video, Dave?
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I'm not that familiar with the case. I'm always intrigued by cases that have photographic or video evidence, to look at. And obviously you saw the sun glinting off something that looked like a structured object. Yeah. I have no idea what that is.
Well, I bring it up because I think at some point we need to look at the fact that all the research you and I did together collectively and some of my own, there's no doubt some very, very, very sophisticated drones are being developed, not only by our intelligence community, but probably by industry and maybe, DOD, kind of people. Department of Defense. So I think as we conclude today, we got to recognize we have on video some things like this from 2003. Can we imagine 17 years later, or even, what was it, 2017, 14 years later, whatever? Could you imagine, Dave? I mean, isn't it possible we could have developed technology where it went from that object with a saucery metallic, a little clumpier thing, navigating away from someone's house in an amazing way, to the Tic Tac you recreated? What do you think?
Well, I don't take anything off the table. I believe that humans have a lot of ingenuity. And when you look at the military and you think of reasons why you would want these devices in craft, obviously keeping pilots out of harm's way is number one in times of conflict and military usage. Clandestine spycraft, flying over our adversaries' homelands without them knowing what it is, without them knowing where they came from. So if you could find a propulsion system that could loiter for long periods of time, we're talking micronuclear motors, other types of hybrid motors that could be hidden and allow these craft to, again, loiter for incredibly many hours over, for instance, territorial waters and so on. If you could bring these drones closer to those locations, perhaps on a ship or a submarine, and then launch them, I mean, that's another thing we should think about. You mentioned totally autonomous, self-aware,
self-aware drones. Yeah.
We know where AI is today. Can you imagine if you project that from a DARPA type of, special access device, and you might say, okay, that's 7 to 10 years from where we are today. That type of AI being used that could be programmed into the computer systems that are controlling these drones. You launch them and off they go. It's sort of like a device, like a dolphin in the ocean, that has a tracking device. It goes on its own and collects information for you. So, yeah. I mean,
absolutely. Yeah. And I'm amazed a little bit, Dave, at other journalists who get paid to be, digging up all the information, how they didn't come up with the general information that the intelligence community is creating self-aware drones that can go out in a grouping or a fleet. Remember, the pilot says there's a fleet of them. So the idea is not so much that these videos show self-aware drones, but the potential that we in America, some scientists, have developed technology that could freak out a pilot, and they don't tell the pilot because they want to be able to see how the pilot's going to react to it. And there appears to be this possibility because we know the history has shown that. So I'm hoping in the future, as we wrap today, that I could bring on the intelligence community contact I have, and he can explain self-aware drones, what that means, give us more information about these Pentagon UFOs, and lastly, the Space Force that Donald Trump has been talking about, the Space Force. Dave, last but not least, the final word. What have you heard about these things falling down from space? You indicated very much in the graphics we created that these things kind of fell down from space. What are we hearing about the Space Force in relation to these objects? Anything you want to wrap it up? Tell me what you think.
Well, to be honest with you, I have been trying to get more information about what was reported on the Aegis system, Spy 1 radar, that in these reports saying coming from space and dropping down to, 50 feet above the water in mere seconds. Well, that means that they were tracking, if this is indeed true, and we do have sort of semi-witnesses that are redacted, but that came forward saying they witnessed on their radar displays objects coming down from, high in the atmosphere, if not space, all the way down to the sea level in seconds. So, I mean, aside from some non-human type technology, you would have to look at some type of satellite technology. Again, this is supposition. I don't know much more about it.
And you showed it in the graphics, so people can replay it later. I mean, this UFO, whatever you want to call it, Tic Tac, dropped allegedly, 80,000 feet or 25,000 feet or whatever, right to 50 feet above the ocean. Imagine if you have a space force of these type of things. Donald Trump is saying how amazing our technology is. I don't know. We're going to have to stay on top of this story, but we will for sure. Everyone knows that here at this show. So, Dave, it's so great to see you again. Everybody, check out Dave's website. Dave, we'll make sure everyone knows where to get both, not only look at your website, be able to see your evolving movie as it goes. And I think you're doing some great work, and it's a pleasure to work with you. And I give you a lot of credit, Dave. You're really kind of inspiring me to stay very focused on all this, and I do appreciate that a lot.
Appreciate the kind words, and thanks for the invite for your new show.
Well, thanks a lot. And we'll look forward to everybody coming back here. We'll be weekly, we hope. We're trying to keep it weekly. And that's it for today on Conspiracy Truth Finders.